that could feed his soul. There was no music that could be appropriate for him. I'm so grateful that I aligned with enough people to remind me that we've always had great soul stirring, beautiful music. We just gotta reach back, and fetch it and go underground because there's a lot of underground artists that they have beautiful music, and there are also people like Suni Paxton, who I wouldn't say is underground, who bring the poetry with the spoken word and also the music. I see her art and music as well. So we give thanks for all those artists because our children definitely we need it. I need inspiration sometimes. I need all the time. Actually, I'm a music head. I want music playing all the time. So I want something that's so stuff. Before we get started, do know that opinions expressed on WRSU do not necessarily represent those of Radio Free Georgia Broadcasting Foundation, Inc., its staff, or volunteers. And let's get into it. The topic of today is what do we tell the children? And I am happy to welcome in my brother, who I've known for a while now. I've met him years ago. And even years ago, this brother has been organizing and doing work with his organization that he founded, African Unity Initiative, Inc., a community and economic development nonprofit organization focused on promoting economic unity among all people of African descent. Our brother Tony Jamal Lee. Jamal, can you hear me? Let me make sure your mic is on. Check 1, 2.
Check. Can you hear me? Check.
Okay, let's move them down. No, stay right there. All right, let's do it again.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Hey, Jamal.
How you doing?
Oh, man, I'm excellent. It's so good to see you be here.
I know, right? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so, listen, Jamal hit me up in my DM. I forget which one of the platforms. And he's like, I need to work with you. I'm like, what a guest. And you continue to do the work. I always admire people who start something and continue. They continue to do work. And I remember, I believe, when I met you, you were at the beginning phases of it.
At the beginning of creating the organization part of it, because I had been doing some things, some panels when I was in school through other people's organizations, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, you've been around the world since then, so I won't even, I won't even tell your whole story. Just introduce yourself to people else so they can know who we are speaking with this evening. But I just want to hear your insight, especially since your focus is African people and unity, and I know with that, in order to ever unify, it has to be some sense of connectivity, and that has to come through education. It has to come through understanding and enlightenment about things. And my opinion, I believe that our children right now, many of our children are getting disconnected from the idea that we are African. They're like, I ain't African, and I won't even just say our children. I would say even some of our adults say, what you mean by that? What is that? And I also want to get into it with you, like, does it really matter? Because some people feel like that's separatism, for you to say, oh, why are you even highlighting the fact that you are African? So I definitely want you to answer the question, what does it mean to be African? But let's just start out by talking about this initiative. What inspired it? What is it all about? African Unity Initiative.
So, good evening, everyone who's listening, Atlanta, the world. I'm Jamal Lee. I am originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm one of the rare ones that's still here. So.
Me too. You too now, born and raised.
So what inspired it, really, it traces all the way back to my childhood. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but I was always interested in Africa. From the time of elementary school, I just remember when I was a child, there weren't that many representations of Africa in media. We had National Geographic, we had Roots, and we had Shaka Zulu. And Shaka Zulu really stood out because it was the only of those representations that showed black people in power. And for whatever reason, that stuck to me through high school, where I would do a lot of reading and doing a lot of research. And then I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. My mother knew somebody who had a book called Sabah, The Reawakening of the African Mind by Dr. Asa Hilliard III. And it was one of those books that And the cool part of that book is it was an annotated bibliography in the seventh chapter, which gave you other books to explore, and it just opened up everything. And so, from that point forward, I knew that I wanted to do something for my people. I just didn't know exactly how I was gonna. And so, when I graduated high school, I went to Howard. Went to Howard just ready because I had read so much about the history of Howard and how everybody there was, on point, conscious, woke, whatever. And I got there and I found that. However, what I found as well was that I was making friends with people who were from the continent of Africa, who had recently immigrated for school, people who were from the Caribbean, and African Americans. And throughout my first semester, I realized I was the only person kind of intermingling between all the distinctions of blackness that were on campus. And as I would talk to people, I would ask, why are they not connecting with one another? And what would come out were these myths that I remember hearing throughout growing up as an African American. But for whatever reason, I did not internalize those myths and just did not believe them. But I realized that a lot of my counterparts who were African American did. Africans don't like African Americans. Africans are responsible for selling us into slave. All these different narratives that were created, and then the Africans had negative narratives about African Americans and people in the Caribbean, and it was just a snake eating its tail. Everything was negative all around, and it was ignorance on all the sides that you can count. And it was just in me. I was like, okay, so I have to do something about this. I have to create a program around it. I've, struck a relationship with key people in every group, so I can get people to come to a conversation and let's just talk about it. And that's pretty much where it all started. And unfortunately, it did not happen at Howard. It didn't happen until I got back. I left Howard because of financial issues, and I ended up at Atlanta Metropolitan State College now. And when I was there, I just met some professors. A key professor was Dr. Kenja McCrae, shout out, who was able to give me access to an organization that was kind of defunct. And I was like, he'll take this organization and, create the programming in it. And this was the first program that I wanted to do because I saw the same thing on the campus of Atlanta Metro. Africans with the Africans, wow. People in the Caribbean with people in the Caribbean, African Americans among themselves, right. And same ignorant narratives and when you talk to the people about where did you get that information, it never sounds like it came from them. It sounds like they've received it passively from an outside source, and they've just accepted it. And that's a lot of what we do. And so I was able to do the dialogue there. I started it there in 2008. I graduated from there, went to Georgia State, finished, and brought it with me to Georgia State, where I did it under the Sankofa Society, under the African American Studies Department. And then when I graduated from Georgia State, I took it off campus. And then I was like, okay, there's more that needs to be done. This dialogue is great, but it's only attracting a certain demographic of people who kind of are on the cusp of already knowing some of the information. That's why they're interested, even if they don't know they're interested. So how do I get the people who grew up in the areas where I grew up? Because what I realized that all these professors that are teaching me is wonderful information, but I've been in Atlanta my entire life and I've never heard of it. And had I not had the opportune fortune of running across certain books throughout my life, or having uncles and big brothers who would give me certain things because they saw my interest, I would not have known this information because it wasn't necessary to be taught in school curriculum. And so it was always in me to say, okay, if I have something, I have to share it, especially people that grew up like me, because I know it wasn't in the Carver Holmes library. And I used to go to the library all the time. I used to read books, but I never saw any books beyond the surface about black people. It would be the Martin Luther King biography written by somebody else, or Frederick Douglass, or Harriet Tubman, but nobody outside of the the super friends of black history
Right.
that they always teach us. And so it was my goal to say, let me take African Diaspora Dialogue, create it into an entire organization where I can actually do some work in the community, where the people that I want to reach really don't have time to even think beyond what's happening in their daily life.
Mm-hmm. By the way, you're listening to the Bridge Talk Radio for parents, teachers, and students, and you are hearing the voice of Jamal Lee, Tony Jamal Lee, founder of African Unity Initiative, Inc. Continue, my brother.
Right. So I just remembered where I grew up, and for the sake of those listening, I am from Atlanta. I'm from the south side of Atlanta. If you're from Atlanta, you know Zone 3. If you're from Atlanta, I'm from Carver Homes. And so it was a housing project. And so I had to think, like, what information is going to strike the people that grew up with me, that grew up like me, that may have not gone to college, that may have not needed to even go to college. Does that mean that they don't ever get this information that's pertinent to all of us? If you grow up to be a mechanic or a hairdresser and you don't need to go to college, do you not need access to this information? But at the same,
I want to jump into the interview there.
Mm-hmm.
Do they need access to the information? I mean, why?
So
I'm going to be the voice that be like, and I mean, and I'm not even being funny, so I hope it doesn't sound like I'm coming off as condescending. But
no, not at all.
there are many people who wonder, is it really that important for us to know about our history, our story, as many of our elders would say? Is it that important? Benefit does it give our children today? It doesn't matter, right? Like, it's a long time ago, and what benefit does it give our children?
So I'll just rewind a little bit. So when I was at Georgia State, I was one of the leaders of an organization called Sankofa Society. And Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol, which is one of the languages in Ghana. And what Sankofa means is you need to know your past in order to go forward. And in the symbol, there's two symbols, but the symbol that is actually a pictorial of what it represents is a bird walking forward but looking backwards. And so in order to know who we are, in order to know exactly where we're going, in order to avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that our ancestors have already made for us, and we can just learn from them without having to make them ourselves, we need to know what happened before. We need to know who we are. When you pluck a plant out of the ground from its root, it's no longer connected. It's no longer alive. It's beautiful for a couple of days, and then it withers away. And so that is the same thing with people. If we're not connected to our roots, not connected to our culture, an example is, and this is something that I usually talk about at the African Diaspora Dialogue. So you have dance. Dance is something that is essential to pretty much all cultures, music and dance. And if you look at current hip hop videos from, let's say, the past 15 to 20 years, and you see women gyrating, they are being over sexualized. However, if you change the context of those same dance moves, they mean something completely different. They can be interpreted as cultural dance moves that we have been doing since we were at home on the continent of Africa. But if we don't know what those dances are and what those movements mean, we can allow somebody else to define what we're doing for us and either make us embrace negativity by saying this negativity is what being black is, or not want to be associated with it at all and saying that negativity is blackness, so I need to remove myself from my blackness in order to advance. That's what happens when we don't control our own narrative, when we don't know where we come from, when we are not attached to our roots.
Totally. Yes, totally. What are some of the narratives that you feel are important for us to be addressing right now with our children? Right now in 2019.
Right. So in 2019, I think it is important, and honestly, this is one of those evergreen narratives that is always going to need to be spoken about. And I always come to things from the love. And what is love? To me, love is building a relationship with people, building a real connection that when people see you coming, they know that you're not only coming around when it's time for them to give you something, or for you to ask them for something, or for you to get on them. And one of the themes of the African Diaspora Dialogue is love and approaching people with love. So when you want to teach somebody a lesson, have you built a relationship with that person before you are putting yourself in the position to correct them? Because are they going to listen to you? Because do they know that this criticism is coming from a place of care? Or are you just putting them down to make them feel bad? And so love is a word that kind of gets pigeonholed into solely romanticized relationships. The word relationship gets pigeonholed into solely romanticized relationships. Building relationships with people is one of the first things we need to know how to do. And it comes to, how do you communicate with people? How do you relate to people? When people talk to you, how do they feel when they leave that conversation? Even if you are in disagreement, can you have a disagreement, a conversation where your goal isn't to prove the other person wrong? Your goal, you have two goals. Your goal is to get your point across so that the other person understands where you're coming from, and that you listen to the other person and understand where they come from. It is not about I'm right and you're wrong. It's not about we need to not leave here until you concede and agree with me. You may concede points throughout. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. But you have to be willing to concede your own points as well. And those things build up the capacity for love. And what that is, communication, building relationships. And then you can love people, and then you can actually start building something in your community. I never go into a community without first observing and learning from them. You mentioned my travels. I was in Guinea, West Africa, and one of the best things about me going to Guinea specifically was that it's not a country where a lot of people speak English. So even though I was there as a volunteer to serve the people, I couldn't even begin to serve the people until they gave me what I needed. I couldn't even speak. So I went there, I was like a baby. I needed them way more than they probably perceived that they needed me. And when they see Americans coming off the planes to Africa and to these other countries, wherever service projects are being done, is usually under the guise of these people who flew over here it's a one-way street. They came to help us. We came to passively receive. And what the bonus was for me, because I was the only African-American male in my group. I was in the Peace Corps. And so what I liked it for myself, but I also liked it because it humbled all the self-righteous white people who came over there to save Africa, because you can't begin to do anything until you learn his language, you learn cultural ways, you shift your mindset, and you become like a child to those people that you came over here to help. And so that's the way I approach any community that I come into. Even if I do speak your language, I kind of don't, because I don't know how things work here. I don't know how things, like I said, I'm from Zone 3. I taught in Zone 1. It's different. It's black people in Atlanta, but it's different. It's different needs, different structure of the communities, but
even sometimes language.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when I go over to Bankhead and I want to do work, I have to find somebody or a group of people who are already there and learn from them and understand, okay, these are the needs of the people. This is the way that you approach people. These are the things that have already worked. Coming in thinking that I have all the answers is the wrong approach. And I see so many organizations go down that road where, and I've seen so much money wasted, whether it be here in the United States or abroad, where people just approve projects and they do them because from their perspective, this is what's wrong with this community. And so let me come in and play Captain Save People and do something that the people never asked for because you never asked. You never gave the people a voice to tell you these, okay, that's nice. Maybe we can do that 10 years from now, or maybe even some months from now. But these are the priorities that we have in this community. This is what's important to us. These are the things we're noticing
right now.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I like that you brought that up, and I want to press it so that parents who have children, many parents who listen in, and teachers, and even students who listen to how do we apply this right now. So I like that you brought that up, and I would ask, how do you establish that? Like, what do you think is the foundational principles that need to be taught in order to establish a mindset of one, it's not all about me, my efforts should be reaching out towards others. That's number one. And then two, how do you establish what principles need to be taught to kind of establish that knowing that love builds relationships and what love is. So say, I told my son to come in here, 14, he's about to go to 9th grade. Lord have mercy, high school. Jesus. What, and I talked to him, he does good with relationships and stuff because he's grew up in a village type environment, so to say. So I get that compliment all the time, like he's so, mannerable and this and that. But even building a relationship with his teachers, building a relationship with new friends, people, all this stuff, like what kind of principles can parents kind of hone in on to make sure they're even thinking like that?
Mm-hmm. So with talking to the youth, it's about patience, and it's really, and people always make these over distinctions of what it takes to talk to young people from what it takes to talk to anybody. It pretty much takes the same principles. You need patience to understand that there are a lot of times, and I remember growing up where I would have teachers and they would always talk about what children don't understand, what they don't know, what they are not doing, and as if they were never children, as if they always knew. And I remember sitting in class in like first grade or something. I was like, so this lady doesn't remember being a child at all? How is that possible? I can't even imagine being an age where I didn't remember certain things from my childhood. And I was just like, I want to make sure that when I grow up, I don't repeat the same thing.
That this adult, yeah.
And so, once again, it's like listening. Children say things. And if you're listening, you might hear a bit of wisdom in something that comes from somebody younger than you, much younger than you. But you have to be open as a parent, as a teacher, as a person in a position of authority with young people, to be open enough to listen to what they have to say. They may not know how to articulate it the best. However, what they say, and when it comes out in its raw form, it's still something in there that you need to be listening to. And you need, as an adult, your ears, the responsibility falls on you as the adult, not on them. You're there to teach them or to show them how to formulate those raw ideas into something. How to turn coal into a diamond.
But you can't do that if you're not listening to them.
Exactly.
You don't even know what they're doing. Akeem, do you find that teachers listen to the children?
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever experienced where you have teachers that really just don't listen to children? And
yes. My 7th grade year, yes.
What does it feel like?
It feels like you just don't have an opinion. You just gotta go with whatever the people say.
Well, I know that wasn't easy for you because you always have an opinion, don't you?
Yes.
All right, you are under the you hearing Tony Jamal Lee. We're gonna be right back. Take care of some station business. Then we're gonna come right back with Jamal, and I want him to talk more about his initiative and what can we do in our households as an initiative to do this same unification, because I know that it is true that these myths do go around. It's so much separation from zone to country to city to state to all these different things. So I want to also, before we leave, get some advice on how do we plant the seed of unification, with our children. So stay tuned. Don't go nowhere. And if you know anybody who would enjoy this program, text them, call them, tell them to tune in.